all right, may I just ask one quick question as we're identifying Q&A in the audience? Okay. I don't know. This question is for Dr. Saeed Khan. Since ISMU published some key poll findings on American Muslims, I was wondering if you could respond a bit based on that data for extrapolate from it. I think a week ago there was an interesting analogy put out about the Skittles regarding Syrian refugees. One of the candidates' children had pointed out that if one went into a bowl and grabbed 3, most likely you'd be poisoned, and if you could correlate that one of the 3 Skittles was a representative Syrian refugee. And then I was surprised that another group, the Cato Institute, refuted that, and they technically tend to lean more right or more libertarian. So when you have a chance, I'd kind of like to hear how surprised you were to hear the right attacking the right, or if that even makes any sense to you.
I think this the Skittles issue is it's a sensitive subject for me because I've never really recovered from the fact that they switched out the lime for green apple. So I have to be very careful with which Skittles I eat. My dentist would agree. I'm not surprised that Cato came out with a study. Is this okay? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm not surprised that Cato came out with a report that refuted the allegation that there is this epidemic among refugees committing crime, and especially violent crime in the United States. If anything that the manufacturing bigotry report showed is that this issue of the targeted, integrated, coordinated legislative effort is not really a red versus blue issue. It's a red versus red issue. There are a lot of people from within the Republican Party who in fact disavow this kind of legislation because they find it to be counterproductive. You probably recall that the day after the 2012 election, there was a myriad panic and yet at the same time resignation from many pundits and opinion makers. Some said traditional America is over, and similar dog whistling that we have lost the country. But there were others who in fact went into damage control mode, who then said we need to have a much more inclusive GOP. We need to have outreach to the Latinos, we need to have outreach to the African Americans, yes, maybe even the outreach to Muslim Americans as well. And that clearly failed. But you see that this was an ideological tension that was working within the GOP. The DNC was off to the races and just getting over their post-election hangover. But this idea that you find Cato and the Heritage Foundation and other people across an ideological bandwidth having these kinds of deliberations is part of the American public discourse, and certainly during the years 2000 to 2008, and I would even suggest during the primaries, you found a similar and symmetrical approach and trajectory within the Democratic side between progressives who were supporting Bernie Sanders and what we would consider to be sort of more mainline liberals who were supporting Hillary Clinton. So these kinds of vicissitudes are not unexpected. Yeah.
Thank you for that indulgence. To the audience, please.
So as we get for questions, and I'm sorry the mics seem to be having problems, so those of you who don't use mics, like me, speak up. Will we start first with thanking our moderator and our distinguished panelists, because these 4 people have come here on behalf of the We're now ready to take a question from some of our team here. We have a lot to think about. We have a great moment here, and here's your opportunity, don't be shy, to offer a question. Thank you. Come on up. You guys introduce yourself. Give your name.
Thanks. Hi,
my name is Joseph, and my question was for Syed. In terms of the gerrymandering, do you think that it could be a self-correcting problem in that the percent of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in the general population decreases and the U.S. becomes a majority-minority? Do you think no matter how these districts are gerrymandered, it could be a self-correcting problem?
Excellent question, Joseph. Yes, I think it's inevitable that with demographic shifts, it will happen. I think it's more of a matter of time. And in the process, the question is how much disenfranchisement will occur and how that will affect communities. I mean, remember, it's not just about voting in or making a district so that it disenfranchises people's political will at the polling booth. But what does it mean in real terms of economics? What does it mean when it comes to those issues which are of interest, of priority, of passion for people simply being elided because of how the gerrymandering affects the composition of the district, if you will? I don't think that this has to be seen as an issue of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant versus the other. In fact, if anything, that's part of the problem right now, that people have created that self versus other dichotomy. If anything, I think, as Ahmed said, there are issues that bring people together of common concern that have nothing to do with race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, immigration status, or religious affiliation. It has to do with issues of education and healthcare and infrastructure redevelopment, for example. So I think that those have to be taken in as part of the calculus when we're looking at these issues. But at the same time, recognize that if anything is happening that is nefarious, that is counterproductive to what was seen as the great civic experiment of American democracy, well, then that has to be called out irrespective of who's doing it. I certainly wouldn't countenance the idea that as a vendetta, another political party comes in and simply gerrymanders in their favor. Because if you want to see how the consequences of that are being played out, it's called Iraq. The idea that with the de-Baathification of Iraq, the ouster of Saddam Hussein, the majority population that came in went into a reign of terror to go ahead and disenfranchise one sect for their own favor. And so we find a society that has now become so fragmented that the optimism about whether it can cohere again is not within this generation's dreams.
Other comments on your side for the panelists? Other questions, please? David, why don't you go ahead and stand up because the mics aren't working.
Okay.
Dave McCurdy on our faculty and former chaplain of the college.
Many years ago. Pre-Scott. Given the reality that you have mentioned that American Muslims, like all Americans, have many interests, not just some of the issues that we talked the most about, do you have any sense that there may, in the end, be some fair amount of support, for example, for Mr. Trump among American Muslims?
Not really. When we're talking about interest, we're talking about broad things. We're talking about, for example, not just civil rights, but education, sports, the film industry, publishing. I mean, Muslims are getting in all sorts of industries today, and they find themselves there as a matter of dream, as a matter of motivation, as a matter of fulfillment. That's what we mean by the diversity of the Muslim community in more ways than one. Also, religion isn't a category for us. It's a set of moral values that may permeate many other categories. So whichever field we're in, or whichever role in life we're in, we have some principles, some guiding, light that helps us be better people when we do what we do. But it isn't a category that we sort of cocoon in on a corner, and then that's all we want to talk about is religion and other people's religion and the religious debates between people. Now, when it comes to Trump, that happens to fall within the arena of how we assess whether a candidate can serve or hurt America and the world. And our response to Trump is based on our answer to that question. It isn't, again, because he's a Republican. Actually, he isn't. He really wasn't when he started. It isn't because, and by the way, even Republicans, we voted, I think, most of us voted for Bush the first time around. So there wasn't anything inherent against Republicans. When Muslims began to sort of flock away from the Republican Party, it was also based on issues and based on a principle. When we saw that terrorism post 9/11 was being used to scaremonger and divide Americans for political gain and for votes and for money and for ratings. And that whole industry, you know, the right wing if you want, the conservative if you want, the Republican if you want, became an object of criticism for us because of that and that alone. We may agree with other things that they believe in, some fiscal conservative, for example, principles, some family values, etc. So with Trump, it is merely a statement on the man's perceived character and his performance, and not any identity issues, whether for us or about him.
Let me just add to that and agree with Ahmed and say that, you know, there is a wide diversity of views, of political views within the Muslim community. You have people who look at economic interests as primary. You look at other social justice issues as primary. So you can have people who may be completely on the opposite coin of, say, the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. And as Ahmed said, in 2000, at least certainly my knowledge is that the majority of Muslims voted for Bush. And it wasn't as if all of a sudden in 2004 they fled the Republican Party. It was much more slower than that. It was a slow weaning away as a result, particularly after 2012, when you begin to see Republican presidential candidates taking publicly anti-Muslim bigoted views publicly. And that's when you begin to slowly see that sort of, you know, going away from them. So despite that, I believe that given the diversity of the American Muslim experience, that you're going to have people who support either party, but a candidate who completely comes out against that particular group, I think, would be a little different.
So can I ask this for our student body, and I'll come up. What would you want to have said directly to the students here at this college, our 18 to 30-year-old student body? What would you like to say to them, beyond all the great things you've already put forward, for our students?
Well, I would say continue to, you know, work hard. Continue to work hard and do what you need to do to obtain your dreams, particularly what you're passionate about in your studies or career, despite the rhetoric that you may be hearing from politicians, despite what you hear from presidential candidates. I think it's important that you continue to pursue whatever you want to do in terms of your education and career. But at the same time, I think it's important that people in college and who have a college education dig deeper into issues, particularly in the area of foreign policy, but also certain areas of domestic policy, to analyze them more critically, to ask questions of elected officials and hold them accountable for positions that they take. For example, the Iraq War, you know, and dig deeper, ask questions, and so forth. I think that that's something that I would like to see across this country, is that people hold their elected officials much more accountable. I mean, we're a democracy. We are the oldest, really, democracy in the world, and it's important that the way that democracy can thrive is not only through elections, of course that's necessary, but you have to have an educated and critical electorate that understands the issues, that looks behind the rhetoric to really understand what the positions are and whether those positions are coherent, are contextual, particularly in a world of globalization, and look to alternative sources of information. Of course, there's social media now. But I think those are the kinds of things I would like to impress upon the audience here, as well as other students and faculty at universities.
I would say embrace nuance in the way you think about yourselves, about others, about the world. As an immigrant who's lived elsewhere, who's been around the world as a traveler, for those who haven't, I ask you to look up at the ceiling right now. And you may just see a ceiling. But as I look at the ceiling, I see, the can lights, the ventilation, the sprinkler system, the security camera, the exit signs in the back, the chandeliers in the middle. There is a Wi-Fi gadget, etc. And as I look at all these things, these are standards, these are codes. Somebody thought them up, somebody implemented them. And we're good at doing that in this country. We're good at scaling. Every building in this campus will have the same codes and standards. Pretty much every building in America that's built after a certain date in history will have certain codes and standards. Our roads, our bridges, our hospitals, every industry in this country operates that way. This is a country of hard-working people. If standards exist around much of the world, they're probably started here, whether in labor laws or otherwise. And what I mean to say here is that for every industry but the political industry, we see this hard-working, leveling, reasoning for the common good. And you benefit from it every single day, even if you don't think about it because you take it for granted having been born here. But for the political arena, it's still a clown show. And we still settle for that. It is still the one place where anybody can say anything. And people listen and go along with it. And the media that serves it, the larger industry around it, the lobbyists, etc. I say as young people, wisen up to the fact that this doesn't mean it's a bad country. To the contrary, it's a great country with great people who build great things, but that at that level, we need major reform, major cleanup, and a major catching up to the other standards of everyday Americans and their aspirations. As such, as you look at other people, don't listen to the guys up top to tell you how to look at them. Think for yourself, see the nuance in others, don't classify, don't categorize. Look at what's common, you'll find it's a lot more than meets the eye. That would be my message to you.
Wow. I don't know how I could really come up with something different than these really sage pieces of advice, but if I could give a wish to you without betraying my age or anything else, in my day, the advice that parents would give their kids going off to college is protect your chastity.
It's from medieval times.
I'm not going to patronize you with that. But what I would implore you to do is protect your agency. The one thing that you have going for you that you can actually protect without willingly giving it away is your agency. Having the ability to go ahead and keep yourself in the game. And I don't envy your challenge to do this because of the compression of time. I was looking at a statistic that said that the number of subscriptions to people with a radio in their homes to hit 50 million took several years. And then for people to get a television, it shrank down to maybe hitting the 50 million mark in 10 years. Pokemon Go, getting 50 million people took 35 minutes. Okay, so it shows you how the compression of time is something that you have to be careful of because it's happening sometimes faster than our ability to process it. If you are an agent and if you don't cede your agency to somebody else, you are a stakeholder and you can maybe have your foot on the brakes to slow things down so that you can process it. And probably other people will appreciate it that if you're slowing it down, it's also slowing it down for them as well. There is something coming down the bend that is even more critical than what is 2043 with the shift majority-minority. This country will manage. But when it comes to agency, you're going to be competing not with people of different ethnicity or different race or different religions. You're going to be competing with non-humans. AI is going to be a reality. Artificial intelligence, it already is in some capacities, and AI with self-awareness is going to be a big reality. Your personhood is going to be challenged. Maintain your agency when it comes to these challenges that are heading your way.
Madam Moderator, do you have comments or questions that you'd like to add to our time as we get close to closure and Reverend Emily Lebrecq has closing remarks?
If it's okay to just do one quick plug. For those of you who live in the western suburbs, this Saturday at the Hinsdale Community Center, we've invited our local and state candidates who are running in elections, both sides. Our mosque has invited them to share their positions on gun safety, socioeconomic reform, Islamophobia, and immigration issues. So if you have a chance this Saturday at 7 p.m., I invite you on behalf of our mosque to join us there.
One more question. Hi, this is Steve.
It isn't really comment to our young students. This is the best time of your life. You have a diverse student body. Don't always hang out with people who look like you and who talk like you. Get to know each other. Because later on in life, you will get, you will be in your jobs, in your suburbs, in your communities. This is the best time. You have an international exposure right here on the college campus. Get to know each other, and then you will realize that if somebody says something about you, about a Muslim or a Polish American or a Jew or a Mexican, you say, no, I know many of them. And this is the chance for you to get to know each other. And you find that in our common humanity, we all want the same things, and we must help each other to achieve our goals. This is the best time of your life. Don't let it go. Learn as much as you can.
Thank you.
These are bad. Sorry. I think that's it for our questions right now. We have one more. Could you stand and offer it, please?
Hello, assalamu alaikum, may peace be unto all of you, not just the Muslims in this room. My name is Talal Khan. I'm a student here. My question is, I guess what can we as Muslims do on this campus specifically to kind of help our situation that we've been experiencing, that you guys have been addressing for some time? And I know we have resources, we have an MSA, Muslim Student Association, that represents, Muslims on campus. But besides that, that's been something that's existed for a long time. But the problems of Islamophobia are still increasing. What do you guys think we could do as Muslims that can help better that can at least play our role in this, helping figure out a solution to this big problem?
I guess I would simply offer a couple of things. Number one is, I think this is, as Dr. Huck said, that this is a unique opportunity for you to learn about other things besides yourselves, your own culture and religion. Obviously that's that too, because you've been constrained ever since junior high and high school and so forth by both family and school. But I would say that use this opportunity to learn other things and discover other things, other worlds, other views of life, other world views. And then secondly, coalition building. Learn how coalitions develop, work with other organizations to try to do good in your own neighborhood. I know there's the tendency to think that, Washington and the world and the global order and international issues, they seem to be the most sexy and exciting. But what really happens on the ground and developing personal relations, they tend to be much more deeper, longer lasting, and they really make a difference. So think local, okay? And also act local. I know we often say think local and act global or reverse, but I think local, act local, build coalitions with fellow organizations and students, with just your other organizations in your community, but continue to learn and discover new things.
Even though I'm the anti-Islamophobia guy, I would say don't limit yourself to worrying about that or fighting back and defending yourself. Rather, figure out who you are. It's probably done already. And figure out your interests and pursue them and excel at them, whatever they may be. Because that in itself is anti-Islamophobia. When people get to know you for the successful person that you are in the sport that you may be interested in the environmental club if that's what you want to do, in student body if you care about rules and regulations and standards for students, etc. Contribute to those various initiatives that are for the common good, not because you want to prove yourself to anyone and because you just want to be fit in, but rather because that's really who you are. You have interests. And you're entitled as anybody else to find space to grow as a person vis-a-vis these interests that are God-given talents to you. So don't limit yourself, don't allow yourself to become the generation that was forced to choke on the Islamophobia bone and then it goes nowhere. That train is going to leave the station at some point. Just be who you are.
I would say that when it comes to, especially a Muslim student association, be conscious of the kind of programming you have, as well as what is the identity you want for the group. If you want it to be something insular or just Muslims to be self-edifying, well, then that's going to then determine the kind of programming you have. All too often you see that MSAs will have Islam Awareness Week, and it's just lectures which are self-gratifying for Muslims. It's not about raising Islam's awareness to others. It's just kind of an I'm okay, instead of an I'm okay, you're okay. So that I think is very important. And the other thing is that I would implore, as Azim said, when it comes to coalition building, that can be with MSA working and collaborating with other organizations on campus, or getting Muslims to not just belong to one organization on campus, being the MSA. The idea that it's not a heresy or a matter of apostasy if they join some of the other groups which specialize in a myriad interests that either they have or should have.
And if it's okay to state the obvious, I love doing this in college, but